Adolf Hitler was the architect behind Germany's plunge into the deadliest and most destructive conflict in history. From a jobless Austrian painter, he became the leader of the National Socialist Party, and then the Führer of Nazi Germany. But how did a day in his life look? What were his strange preferences and unusual desires? You'll find out in the following minutes. According to Albert Speer, the German Minister of Armament, Hitler's schedule during the war looked like this. In the morning, the Führer woke up around 9 a.m. He had a breakfast which included coffee, bread, and marmalade. After breakfast, Hitler was brought the daily press, whose review clearly affected his mood. Later, he patiently listened to foreign press comments, which he seemed to take more seriously than reality. After the press review, he was brought reports regarding air raids which had taken place in the previous night. Speer had repeatedly tried to convince Hitler to look at the bombed cities, but the Führer refused to fulfill Speer's requests, which he considered to be strange. However, he was well informed about the damage caused by air raids. Hitler seemed to be clearly shocked by the bombings, but not because of the loss of population or destruction of residential buildings, but because of the loss of valuable buildings, theaters in particular. While reading these reports, Hitler had the habit of expressing offensive opinions about the English government and Jews, who he believed were guilty of those raids. Then, the German Führer had a short walk inside his protected security perimeter, despite the appeals of Dr. Theodor Morell, who had suggested Hitler had to take long walks. During the walks, Hitler most often did not take an interest in the person accompanying him, but he focused his attention on his German shepherd, Blondie, whom he tried to train on these occasions. After several exercises in retrieving, the dog had to balance on a small board, set at a height of 2 meters. Blondie probably played the most important role in Hitler's life. It seems that the dog was more important to Hitler than his closest associates. If none of the distinguished guests were present in the quarters, Hitler would eat meals only in the company of his dog. During the mentioned walks, each of the members in his staff had the right to address him in personal matters. For example, when one of the waiters at the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's East Prussian headquarters, was dismissed by Martin Bormann because he allowed a box to be taken into the bunker without checking its contents, he could talk to Hitler before his departure, tell about his troubles, and ask for his action. The Führer gave him a letter of intent, recommending that he shall be employed in the Reich Chancellery, and when the storm in the Wolf's Lair ceased, he ordered him to be taken back to work. Generally, there was an unwritten rule that no one disturbed Hitler without a need during relaxation. It was considered very important for the health of the Führer to walk and play with his dog without any trouble. Life in the headquarters began around 11 a.m. Franz Halder, the chief of the general staff, appeared with his generals at the council, during which the course of military operations was discussed in detail with Hitler regarding ongoing operations on all fronts. After the reports of the army commanders, army groups, or their representatives participating in the council, Hitler discussed the general situation with General Alfred Jodl. The afternoon deliberations usually began at 12 p.m. and lasted 1 or 2 hours, sometimes longer. During these meetings, Hitler asked his orderlies to give him his golden glasses. Since 1935, the Führer used glasses to read. He used a large magnifying glass to study the maps given to him by the Supreme Command of the Wehrmacht. In order not to appear publicly in glasses, he ordered, from the time he was appointed Chancellor, to prepare all texts of speeches and official letters on specially designed typewriters, with a large font size and 10-millimeter intervals between the lines, so he could read them without much trouble and without using his glasses in public speeches. In the afternoon, Hitler invited his doctors, secretary, military, and civil adjutants for tea. These guests commonly included notable members of the state, like Ambassador Huell, Martin Bormann, and Albert Speer, who described these meetings as follows. Hitler liked to create a nice atmosphere on this occasion, often with a burning fireplace. He handed the cake to the secretaries himself and cared for his guests as a master of the house. There was a silent agreement to avoid discussions about war and politics during these meetings, and not to criticize the leading personalities of the Third Reich. For understandable reasons, he had no need to discuss it. We were laughing with jokes, repeatedly told by Hitler, as if they had been said for the first time. It was difficult to revive the atmosphere of those meetings, It was very boring, and only courtesy and sense of tact forced us to take part in them. After hours of monotonous discussions, we were overcome by a dream. We barely looked at our eyes. The Führer had an unusual ability to sustain conversation or direct it to other tracks. He never talked about the significant problems of war during a meal, and vice versa. He directed the content of the conversation on his most preferred topics. Most times he started talking about the harmfulness of smoking cigarettes. Before the German defeat at Stalingrad, Hitler listened to Beethoven's symphonies, operas from Wagner, or Hugo Wolf's songs. He could then sit for hours with his eyes closed and listen to music. The same records were always set, and the tea participants knew their names by heart. After Stalingrad, Hitler was unable to listen to music, so the guests spent the evenings listening to his monologues. Still on the same subjects: his youth in Vienna, the period of struggle, the history of mankind, micro and macrocosmos. While listening to these stories, they usually knew in advance what he would say in a moment. When he spoke, no one dared to interrupt him. Due to the fact that Hitler often repeated himself, his inner circle always knew by heart what he had to say on a specific topic. It resulted from the fact that all residents of the quarters were condemned to long-term co-presence and knew each other too well. Later in the evening, Hitler took private conversations in his shelter with one of the invited guests, or with Bormann sometimes. During those night debates, Albert Speer believed he met another Hitler, one that he knew from paintings, newspapers, and stories. He thought that the Führer showed great knowledge of the masses' psychology, had the ability to synthesize problems, the irresistible will to reform the world, exceptional intelligence, memory, and self-esteem. After dinner, Hitler went to his shelter again, unless the order of the day was the Wochenschau, a weekly chronicle of wartime events. For this purpose, a separate room in the Wolf's Lair was designed, built, and later used. The Führer usually watched the chronicles twice, and then approached the topic presented in the film. Sometimes he shared comments, gave suggestions, or interfered in the commentary. When the war began, Hitler gave up both watching comedies and theatrical performances because he believed that during the war, when soldiers on the front are deprived of all entertainment, it is not acceptable to share any pleasures. The exception was a film, displayed on the occasion of Mussolini's visit, and a guest theater performance from Bayreuth, Dusk of the Gods, devoted to the wounded in 1940. Therefore, the only movies Hitler watched regularly were these newsreels from the Wochenschau. The only moments of passion and complete relaxation in Hitler's life, in the Wolf's Lair, were his telephone night talks with Eva Braun. For Hitler, Eva Braun was the ideal of a fashionable, athletic, and resourceful woman. He felt that he loved her tenderly. Afterwards, Hitler went to his room and struggled to go to sleep due to his chronic insomnia. He usually worked until early hours of the morning, especially if he could not sleep, and sometimes went to bed as late as 4 a.m. Surprisingly, it seems like even one of the most genocidal dictators in history had his preferences, a routine, and some people with whom he enjoyed spending his time. So, what do you think? Was Hitler out of the ordinary, or just an unusual individual regarding his daily routine? Thanks for watching. Share your opinion in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to our channel. There are many more coming at Study of War.